Zelvan had studied humans for 6 years. He had read their history, analyzed their battle records, and written 3 academic papers on their military tactics. He considered himself an expert on the species. But standing on the dusty plains of Vara 7, watching them prepare for a battle they could not possibly win, he realized he understood nothing about them at all. The Torvian intelligence officer adjusted his optical scanner and focused on the human encampment below. 8,000 soldiers. That was all they had sent. 8,000 humans against the Cathar Dominion's invasion force of nearly 200,000 warriors. The numbers were so uneven that Zelvan had checked his instruments 3 times to make sure they were working properly. "You seem troubled," Commander Rilith said, stepping beside him on the observation platform. "I am confused," Zelvan admitted. "The humans have volunteered to hold the front line. Their commander presented the plan to coalition leadership this morning. They want to face the Cathar directly while our forces establish secondary positions." Rilith made a soft clicking sound with his throat, a Torvian expression of dark amusement. "And this confuses you? It is suicide. The mathematics are clear. They will be overwhelmed within hours." "Perhaps," Rilith said. "Or perhaps your mathematics are missing some variables. I have seen humans fight before, Zelvan. You have only read about it." Zelvan wanted to argue, but he held his tongue. His commander was old and had served in conflicts across 3 sectors. If Rilith believed there was something worth watching, then Zelvan would watch. He made his way down from the platform and walked toward the human section of the camp. Coalition forces from 12 different species filled the staging ground, but the humans had set up their tents apart from the others. Not out of arrogance, Zelvan noted, but out of practicality. Their equipment was different. Their methods were different. Everything about them was slightly out of step with standard Galactic military procedure. As he approached, he saw a human officer standing before a group of soldiers. The officer was not particularly tall or muscular. He looked tired, with dark circles under his eyes and dust covering his uniform. A small name tag on his chest read, "Carter." "Listen up," Captain Carter said to his troops. His voice was calm and steady, as if he were discussing supply schedules rather than imminent combat. "The Cathar will hit us at dawn. They outnumber us significantly. Coalition Command has made it clear that our job is to buy time for defensive positions to be established behind us." Zelvan expected fear. He expected protests or demands for reinforcement. The soldiers before Captain Carter simply nodded. Some of them checked their weapons. Others adjusted their gear. A few exchanged quiet words with the soldiers beside them. "We hold until we are relieved or until there is nothing left to hold," Carter continued. "Sergeant Brooks, your squad takes the eastern flank. Lieutenant Mitchell, you have tactical command if I go down. Questions?" There were no questions. Zelvan felt a chill run through his scales. These beings knew they were going to die. They had done the same calculations he had done. And yet they stood there as if death were simply another item on their schedule. A female officer noticed him watching and walked over. Her name tag identified her as Mitchell. She was young by human standards, perhaps 30 cycles, with short brown hair and sharp eyes. "You're the Torvian analyst," she said. It was not a question. "Commander Rilith mentioned you might observe our operations." "I am here to document," Zelvan said carefully. "For the official record." Lieutenant Mitchell smiled, but there was no humor in it. "Document away. Just stay behind the line when things start. Cathar plasma weapons make a mess of organic tissue." "You speak of the battle very casually," Zelvan observed. "Would panic help?" "No, but your calm seems unnatural." Mitchell looked out toward the horizon where the enemy forces were massing. Zelvan could see the glow of their camp fires stretching for kilometers. The Cathar were not hiding. They wanted the coalition to see their numbers. They wanted fear. We have a saying, Mitchell said quietly. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is the decision that something else is more important than fear. She turned back to Zelvan. Every soldier here is afraid. We just have something more important to focus on. And what is that? Each other. The civilians being evacuated behind us. The soldiers from your species and others who need time to prepare. She shrugged. Humans are very good at finding reasons to keep going. That night, Zelvan could not sleep. He walked through the human camp and watched them prepare. Some soldiers wrote letters on small electronic devices. Others sat in groups, talking and sometimes laughing. A few prayed to gods. Zelvan did not recognize. He stopped near a supply tent where a young soldier was checking medical equipment. The soldier looked barely old enough to fight, with nervous hands and wide eyes. First deployment? Zelvan asked. The soldier jumped slightly, then relaxed when he saw Zelvan's coalition insignia. That obvious. You keep touching your weapon to make sure it is still there. The young human laughed softly. Private Cole, Marcus Cole. And yeah, this is my first real combat. Training is different, you know? Are you frightened? Cole was quiet for a moment. Terrified, he admitted. But Sergeant Brooks told me something that helped. He said that bravery is being the only one who knows you are afraid. Everyone here is scared. We just do the job anyway. Zelvan thought about that long after he returned to his observation post. He had read about human courage in reports and studies. He had seen statistics about their willingness to take risks. But statistics could not capture what he was seeing now. These were not fearless warriors. They were ordinary beings who had chosen to stand in the path of destruction because someone had to die as dawn approached. Zelvan watched the humans take their positions along the defensive line. They moved with quiet efficiency, checking equipment and confirming positions. Captain Carter walked among them, speaking briefly with each squad, his presence somehow making the impossible seem manageable. On the horizon, the Cathar army began to move. 200,000 warriors advanced in perfect formation, their battle drums echoing across the plains. The ground itself seemed to tremble under their march. Zelvan raised his optical scanner and focused on the human line. 8,000 soldiers faced the approaching storm. They did not retreat. They did not waver. They simply waited. And in that moment, Zelvan understood that whatever happened next would change everything he thought he knew about this strange, stubborn species from a small blue planet called Earth. The Cathar attacked at first light, just as Captain Carter had predicted. Zelvan watched from his observation post as the enemy army surged forward like a dark tide rolling across the plains. Their war cries filled the air, a terrible sound that made his scales tighten against his body. The humans did not move. They stayed in their positions, weapons ready, watching the approaching horde with an eerie stillness. Zelvan had expected them to open fire immediately, to throw everything they had at the enemy while distance still favored them. Instead, they waited. Why are they not shooting? He muttered into his recorder. The Cathar were known throughout the galaxy as fierce warriors. They were large, heavily armored beings with forearms and skin tough enough to resist most standard weapons. Their reputation was built on countless victories. No species had ever defeated them in ground combat. Their generals did not plan for losses because they rarely experienced any. The enemy front line was now 500 meters from the human position. Still, the humans waited. 400 meters. 300. Zelvan felt his heart pounding. This was madness. The humans were letting the enemy get too close. At this range, the Cathar advantage in numbers would be impossible to overcome. Then Captain Carter gave a single command that Zelvan could not hear, and the human line exploded with fire. The sound was unlike anything Zelvan had experienced. Human weapons roared in coordinated bursts, creating overlapping fields of destruction that tore into the Cathar advance. The enemy front ranks simply ceased to exist. Soldiers who had been charging forward one moment were gone the next, but the Cathar kept coming. Their numbers were too great to be stopped by a single volley. They pushed through the fire, climbing over their fallen comrades. Driven by rage and the absolute certainty of victory, they reached the human line and crashed against it like a wave hitting a rock. The rock did not break. Zelvan watched in astonishment as human soldiers met the Cathar charge without retreating a single step. The fighting became close and brutal. Humans fired their weapons at point-blank range, switched the blades when enemies got too close, and used their bodies as shields to protect wounded comrades. He focused his scanner on Sergeant Brooks, the squad leader he had seen the night before. Brooks was in the thick of the fighting, directing his soldiers with hand signals while simultaneously engaging 3 Cathar warriors. He moved with a fluid grace that seemed impossible for a species not designed for combat. When his weapon ran empty, he used it as a club. When a Cathar knocked him down, he rolled back to his feet and kept fighting. "This is not possible," Zelvan whispered. They should have been overwhelmed in the first minutes. The minutes passed and the humans held. Then an hour passed. Then 2. The Cathar commanders, confused by the unexpected resistance, pulled their forces back to regroup. Zelvan saw them gathering in the distance, their officers shouting orders and reorganizing their ranks. They had expected to sweep through the human line like wind through grass. Instead, they had lost thousands of warriors and gained nothing. Zelvan climbed down from his platform and made his way toward the human position. He needed to see this up close. He needed to understand. The battlefield was covered with bodies, mostly Cathar, but some human as well. Medics moved among the fallen, checking for survivors. One of them, a female soldier with blood on her uniform, was treating a wounded Cathar warrior. Zelvan stopped and stared. "What are you doing?" The medic, whose name tag read Shaw, looked up briefly. "My job." "He is injured. He is the enemy." "He is injured," Shaw repeated, as if that explained everything. She continued working, stopping the bleeding from a wound in the Cathar soldier's side. The warrior looked at her with confusion in his eyes, unable to understand why the creature he had been trying to kill was now saving his life. Zelvan found Captain Carter near the center of the line. The human commander had a bandage wrapped around his left arm and burns on his face, but he was still on his feet, still giving orders. "Your people fought well," Zelvan said. Carter glanced at him. "We are not finished yet. They will come again. You are wounded. You should seek medical attention after my soldiers are treated." Carter turned back to his troops, checking their positions and supplies. "How does it look from the observation post? Are coalition forces establishing the secondary line?" "Yes, you have bought them significant time." Carter nodded, but there was no satisfaction in his expression. "Good. That is what matters. You knew you would suffer heavy losses. I knew it was possible. And you still volunteered your forces for this position." Captain Carter was silent for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was quiet. "Someone had to stand here, analyst. If we had not volunteered, Coalition Command would have assigned one of the other species. Torvians, maybe. Or the Valeth. Good soldiers, all of them, but not built for this kind of fighting." He looked out at the enemy forces regrouping in the distance. "Humans are stubborn. We do not know when to quit. That makes us useful in situations like this." "It makes you valuable," Zelvan corrected. Carter shook his head. "It makes us necessary. There's a difference." The second Cathar assault came 2 hours later. It was larger than the first, with fresh troops and heavier weapons. The battle lasted until sunset, a grinding, bloody affair that tested every limit of human endurance. Zelvan watched it all. He documented every charge, every counterattack, every moment when the line seemed about to break but somehow held together. He saw soldiers carrying wounded comrades to safety while still firing at the enemy. He saw officers leading from the front, sharing every danger with their troops. When darkness finally ended the fighting, the Cathar pulled back again. They had made no progress. The human line remained intact. That night, Zelvan walked through the human camp and saw exhausted soldiers eating cold rations and tending to their wounds. Many of them had not slept in over 30 hours. Some would never sleep again. Yet when he listened to their conversations, he heard no complaints. He heard soldiers checking on each other, sharing supplies, making dark jokes about their situation. He heard them planning for tomorrow as if tomorrow were guaranteed. Lieutenant Mitchell found him near the medical tent. She looked as exhausted as everyone else, with dirt and blood covering her uniform. "Your documentation going well?" she asked. "I do not know how to document what I'm seeing," Zelvan admitted. "My training did not prepare me for this." Mitchell smiled tiredly. "Welcome to war, analyst. Nothing ever prepares you for it. You just survive it and hope you stay human on the other side." Zelvan did not fully understand what she meant, but he was beginning to. 3 days had passed since the first battle. 3 days of constant fighting, minimal sleep, and dwindling supplies. The humans had repelled 12 major assaults. 12 times the Cathar had thrown themselves against the line. 12 times they had been pushed back, but the cost was becoming impossible to ignore. Zelvan stood in the field hospital, watching medics work on wounded soldiers. The facility had been designed to handle 200 patients. It now held over 600. Human medics moved between beds with quiet efficiency, treating injuries that would have killed most other species. Corporal Shaw was still working, though she had not rested in at least 40 hours. Her hands were steady as she stitched a wound closed on a young soldier's chest. The soldier was unconscious, his face pale from blood loss. "He will live," Shaw said, noticing Zelvan watching. The wound missed his vital organs by centimeters. "Lucky. Is luck a factor you rely upon?" Shaw smiled grimly. "We rely on everything we can get." A communication officer rushed into the tent and spoke quietly with the senior medic. Zelvan saw the medic's face tighten, then go carefully blank. "Bad news." He did not need translation to understand that expression. He left the hospital and made his way to the command post. Something had changed. He could feel it in the air, see it in the way officers moved with sudden urgency that Captain Carter was inside, speaking with Lieutenant Mitchell and several other officers. A holographic display showed the battlefield situation in harsh detail. The Cathar forces were still enormous. Coalition positions were marked in blue, human positions in green. The green markers were surrounded on 3 sides. "Coalition Command has issued new orders," Carter said. His voice was flat, without emotion. "General retreat begins at midnight. All forces are to fall back to the secondary defensive line." "And us?" Lieutenant Mitchell asked. "We hold position to cover the retreat. Rear guard duty." The room went silent. Every officer understood what that meant. Rear guard against an overwhelming enemy force was not a defensive position. It was a death sentence. Someone had to stay behind and fight while everyone else escaped. Someone had to die so others could live. Zelvan expected arguments. He expected demands for support or requests to share the burden with other coalition forces. Instead, Lieutenant Mitchell simply nodded. "I will inform the squad leaders," she said. "Tell them the truth," Carter replied. "They deserve to know what they are volunteering for." "Yes, sir." The officers filed out to deliver the news to their troops. Zelvan remained, watching Captain Carter study the holographic display. The human commander looked older than he had 3 days ago. The weight of command showed in every line of his face. "You should leave with the coalition forces," Carter said without turning around. "There is no need for you to stay. I am here to document. You can document from a safe distance." "No," Zelvan said. "I cannot." Carter finally turned to look at him. "Why?" Zelvan thought about the question carefully. 3 days ago, he would have said his job was to observe and record, to create an academic analysis of human military capability. But something had changed. He had watched humans bleed and die for soldiers of other species. He had seen them treat enemy wounded with the same care as their own. He had witnessed courage that defied all logical explanation. "Because someone should remember what happens here," Zelvan said finally. "Someone who understands what it means." Carter studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Then stay. But when the end comes, get to the evacuation zone. The universe should know this story." That night, Zelvan found Commander Rilith preparing to leave with the main coalition forces. His superior officer was overseeing the loading of intelligence equipment onto transport vehicles. "You are staying with the humans," Rilith said. It was not a question. "Yes, that is unwise. Your expertise is valuable to coalition intelligence. And what the humans are doing is valuable to everyone," Zelvan replied. "They are dying so that soldiers from a dozen different species can escape. They volunteered for a mission everyone knew was hopeless. Do you not find that worthy of documentation?" Rilith was quiet for a moment. "I told you that your mathematics were missing variables. Do you understand now what I meant?" "I am beginning to. The humans have a capacity that we lack," Rilith said slowly. "They can look at certain death and find meaning in it. They can sacrifice themselves for strangers without hesitation. It is not logical. It is not efficient. But it is something we have never been able to replicate, no matter how advanced our technology becomes. Is that why Coalition Command always assigns humans to the hardest positions?" Rilith did not answer directly. "Stay safe, analyst. Complete your documentation. Make sure the galaxy understands what happened here." The commander left with the retreating forces. Zelvan watched the transports disappear into the night, carrying thousands of soldiers to safety. Behind him, the humans prepared for their final stand. He found Lieutenant Mitchell near the forward defensive line, checking equipment with her soldiers. She looked up as he approached. "You actually stayed," she said. "Surprised. I said I would document. Most documenters prefer to do it from somewhere safe. Safe documentation tells incomplete stories." Mitchell laughed softly. The first genuine laugh Zelvan had heard from her in days. "Pull up some dirt, analyst. It is going to be a long night." Zelvan sat beside her on the dusty ground. Around them, human soldiers were writing final messages, checking weapons, and sharing quiet moments with their comrades. Some prayed. Others simply sat in silence, preparing themselves for what was coming. "Are you afraid?" Zelvan asked. "Terrified," Mitchell admitted. "But fear is just information. It tells you something important is happening. What matters is what you do with that information. And what are you doing with it?" Mitchell looked out at the darkness where the enemy was waiting. "I am using it to stay sharp, to protect the people beside me, to make sure that when the end comes, I have done everything I could." She glanced at him. "That is all any of us can do, really, human or otherwise." Zelvan recorded her words carefully. They felt important in a way he could not quite explain. This was why he had stayed. Not for data or analysis, but for understanding. For truth. In the distance, the Cathar were preparing their final assault. Tomorrow would bring the end, one way or another. But tonight, surrounded by humans who had chosen to stand when running was easier, Zelvan felt something he had never experienced before. He felt honored to be among them. Dawn came slowly on the fourth day, painting the sky in shades of red and orange. Zelvan thought the colors looked like blood. Perhaps that was appropriate. The Cathar had gathered their remaining forces during the night. Over 100,000 warriors stood in formation on the plains, their battle standards flying in the morning wind. They had brought every reserve unit, every heavy weapon, every soldier who could still fight. This would be their final assault. They intended to end the battle today. Against them stood fewer than 5,000 humans. Zelvan moved through the defensive line, recording everything he saw. Soldiers were checking their weapons one final time. Some shared ammunition with comrades who had run low. Others simply stood together, drawing strength from proximity. He found Sergeant Brooks near the eastern flank, organizing his remaining squad members. The sergeant had been wounded twice in the previous days. Bandages covered his left arm and shoulder. He moved stiffly, but he moved. "Analyst," Brooks said with a nod. "Still documenting?" "Until the end." "Good. Someone should write this down." Brooks looked at his soldiers, young men and women who had fought beside him for 3 days. "You know what I told Private Cole before the first battle? I told him that bravery is being the only one who knows you are afraid. I remember. I was wrong." Brooks shook his head slowly. "Real bravery is being afraid and standing next to someone else who is just as afraid, and both of you deciding to face it together anyway." The Cathar war drums began to sound. The massive army started moving forward, a wall of armored bodies stretching from horizon to horizon. The ground shook under their advance. Captain Carter's voice came over the communication system, calm and steady as always. "All units, hold position. Make every shot count. Remember why we are here." The humans did not cheer or shout battle cries. They simply raised their weapons and waited. The first wave of Cathar hit the line like a hammer blow. The impact was immediate and devastating. Humans fell in the opening moments, cut down by plasma fire and overwhelming numbers. But for every human who fell, 3 soldiers stepped forward to fill the gap. Zelvan watched the battle unfold with growing horror and amazement. The humans were not just fighting. They were performing something almost like a dance, each soldier moving in coordination with those beside them. When one ran out of ammunition, another covered them. When one was wounded, hands reached out to drag them to safety. Corporal Shaw was everywhere at once, it seemed. She treated wounded soldiers while plasma bolts flew overhead, her hands never shaking. At one point, Zelvan saw her run into the open to reach a fallen soldier. She dragged him back to cover while Cathar warriors fired at her from 20 meters away. Somehow, she survived, but not everyone did. Lieutenant Torres fell defending a communications post. Private Cole, the nervous young soldier Zelvan had spoken with before the first battle, died holding a position long enough for his squad to retreat to better cover. Dozens, then hundreds of humans fell as the morning stretched into afternoon. And still they held. Zelvan found himself near a collapsed section of the defensive line. Human soldiers were falling back, trying to establish a new position. Cathar warriors were pushing through the gap, threatening to split the defense in two. A human weapon lay on the ground beside a fallen soldier. Without thinking, Zelvan picked it up. He had never fired a weapon before. Torvians were analysts, not warriors. His hands were designed for instruments and recording devices, not tools of destruction. But in that moment, none of that mattered. A Cathar warrior charged toward a wounded human who could not run. Zelvan raised the weapon and fired. The shot went wide, but it was enough to make the warrior hesitate. That hesitation gave another human soldier time to reach the wounded man and pull him to safety. Zelvan kept firing. He did not hit much. His aim was terrible, and his technique was non-existent. But he stood in the line with the humans and fought beside them. For the first time in his life, he understood what it meant to be part of something larger than himself. Sergeant Brooks appeared beside him, bleeding from a fresh wound on his forehead. "Not bad for an analyst," he said, reloading his own weapon. "Stay close and keep shooting." They fought together as the sun crossed the sky. Zelvan lost track of time. Everything became a blur of noise and smoke and desperate action. He saw humans perform acts of incredible courage. He saw them shield each other with their bodies, hold positions that should have been impossible to hold, refuse to retreat even when retreat was the logical choice. He saw Corporal Shaw get hit while trying to save a wounded Cathar soldier. She fell, clutching her side, but continued giving medical instructions to another medic, even as her own blood soaked the ground. As evening approached, the Cathar finally pulled back. Their losses had been catastrophic. The ground before the human line was covered with their dead. They had expected victory and found only death, but the humans had paid a terrible price as well. Zelvan walked through the position as darkness fell. Fewer than 2,000 soldiers remained standing. Many of them were wounded. All of them were exhausted beyond anything Zelvan could imagine. Captain Carter sat on a broken piece of equipment, getting his wounds treated by a medic. He had been hit 3 times during the battle, but had refused to leave the line. His face was pale from blood loss, but his eyes were still alert. "Tomorrow they will come again," Carter said quietly. "We cannot survive another assault like that." "Then what will you do?" Carter looked at his soldiers, the tired and wounded survivors of 4 days of impossible fighting. "We will stand here anyway. We will make them pay for every meter. And when we fall, the galaxy will know that humans do not surrender." Zelvan sat down beside him. His borrowed weapon was empty, and his hands were shaking with exhaustion. "I finally understand your fame," he said. "Our fame? I read about humans before coming here. Every report mentioned your reputation as warriors. I thought it was exaggeration, propaganda." Zelvan shook his head. "I was wrong. But it is not your skill in battle that makes you famous. It is your refusal to stop, your ability to find meaning in hopeless situations." Carter smiled tiredly. "That is just stubbornness." "No," Zelvan said. "It is something more. Something I do not have a word for in my language." They sat in silence as the night grew deeper. Around them, human soldiers prepared for what everyone believed would be their final stand. They did not weep or despair. They simply checked their weapons, tended their wounds, and prepared to fight one more time, because that was what humans did. The 5th dawn brought clouds that blocked the sun and turned the sky gray. Zelvan thought it fitting. The universe itself seemed to be mourning what was about to happen. Fewer than 2,000 humans remained. Many could barely stand. Their ammunition was nearly gone. Their defensive positions had been reduced to rubble and bodies. Medical supplies had run out the previous evening. Yet when Zelvan walked among them, he saw no despair. Soldiers helped each other to their feet. They shared the last of their water. They made quiet jokes about their situation, finding humor in places Zelvan could not understand. Captain Carter gathered his officers for a final briefing. His wounds had been treated as well as possible, but he moved with obvious pain. His voice, however, remained steady. "The Cathar will attack within the hour," he said. "We have enough ammunition for maybe 30 minutes of sustained fire. After that, we go to blades and bare hands if necessary." He looked at each officer in turn. "It has been an honor serving with all of you." Lieutenant Mitchell stepped forward. "The honor has been ours, sir." The officers dispersed to their positions. Zelvan followed Captain Carter to the center of the line, where he could observe the entire battlefield. The Cathar army was assembling again, smaller than before, but still overwhelming. Perhaps 50,000 warriors remained. Against them stood humanity's final 1,800 soldiers. You should go to the evacuation point, Carter said. Coalition forces will send a rescue team once we fall. You might make it. I will stay. Carter did not argue. There was nothing left to argue about. The Cathar began their advance. War drums echoed across the plains. Battle cries filled the air. The final assault had begun. Human soldiers raised their weapons. Some had only a few shots left. Some had none at all. They would throw rocks if they had to. They would fight with their teeth and their fingernails. They would not stop until their hearts stopped beating. The enemy was 300 meters away. When something changed, Zelvan heard a sound in the distance. A deep rumbling that seemed to come from everywhere at once. He looked up and saw shapes dropping through the clouds. Ships. Dozens of ships bearing coalition markings. Their weapons already firing. The Cathar advance faltered as plasma cannons tore into their ranks from above. Troop transports landed behind the human line, discharging fresh soldiers by the thousands. Torvians, Veleth, species from across the coalition, all arriving at once. Commander Rilith emerged from one of the transports and walked directly to Captain Carter. Coalition Command changed their orders, he explained. When word spread about what your people were doing here, soldiers from 14 different species refused to retreat further. They demanded to return and fight. Carter stared at him. You came back. You gave us time. You gave us hope. Rilith gestured toward the fresh troops taking up positions along the line. This is how the coalition repays that debt. The battle resumed, but now the odds had shifted. Coalition forces outnumbered the Cathar for the first time. Fresh soldiers pushed forward while the exhausted humans finally rested. Weapons that had been silent for days roared back to life. The Cathar, already weakened by 4 days of costly assaults, could not withstand the counterattack. Their lines broke. Their warriors fled. For the first time in their species' military history, they experienced complete defeat. When the fighting finally ended, Zelvan walked across the battlefield. Coalition soldiers were helping the wounded, human and Cathar alike. Medics treated enemy warriors with the same urgency as their own people. It was the human way, and it had spread to everyone who had fought beside them. He found Corporal Shaw in the field hospital. She had survived her wounds, though barely. A medic from another species was treating her while she gave instructions on how to help a Cathar patient nearby. You should rest, Zelvan told her. I will rest when everyone is stable, Shaw replied. Even now, after everything, she would not stop helping. The surviving humans gathered near the center of what had been their defensive line. There were so few of them. Of the 8,000 who had stood against the Cathar 5 days ago, fewer than 1,100 remained alive. Most of those were wounded. They did not celebrate. There were no cheers or songs of victory. They simply sat where they had fought, too exhausted for anything except relief and grief. Some wept for fallen friends. Others stared at nothing, still processing what they had survived. Captain Carter walked among them one final time, checking on each soldier personally. His wounds made every step painful, but he refused to stop until he had seen every face, spoken every name. These were his people. He would not abandon them. In the days that followed, Zelvan compiled his official report. He documented troop movements, tactical decisions, casualty figures, and strategic outcomes. It was the kind of analysis coalition intelligence expected from him, but he also wrote something else. A personal account that he attached to the end of his report. Words that no training had taught him to write. I came to Verith 7 to document a species I thought I understood. I had studied humans for years. I believed their reputation was exaggeration, their courage overrated, their stubbornness a weakness rather than a strength. I was wrong about everything. For 5 days, I watched 8,000 humans hold a line against impossible odds. They did not fight because they enjoyed war. They did not sacrifice themselves for glory or conquest. They fought because others needed them too. They died so that soldiers from other species could live. When their ammunition ran out, they fought with blades. When their blades broke, they fought with their hands. When death was certain, they stood anyway, because standing was the only choice they could accept. I watched them treat enemy wounded with the same care as their own. I watched them weep for fallen comrades and then pick up weapons to fight again. I watched them find hope where none existed and create meaning where logic said there was none. I finally understand humanity's galactic fame. It is not built on victories or conquests. It is built on what they are willing to sacrifice and what they refuse to become. Even in the darkest moments, they are not the strongest species in the galaxy. They are not the smartest or the most advanced, but they may be the most human. If I can use that word for what I mean, they carry the weight of every life, enemy and ally alike, and somehow find the strength to keep standing. I am honored to have stood beside them. Zelvan submitted his report and walked outside. In the distance, human soldiers were helping rebuild a destroyed village. The same hands that had held weapons now held tools. The same people who had killed were now creating. He watched them work until the sun set, and he understood at last why the galaxy would never forget what happened on Varath-7. Because humanity had shown everyone what it truly meant to be brave.